We start recording, please. Thank you. So can I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand in person if they're sat in the chamber, or use the remote raise hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak by me as chair, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place the message in their chat function. If a participant wishes to speak, when invited to address by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this isn't possible for any reason, please bring it to the attention of myself or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and to get my attention or the attention of an officer if need be. And if any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, they should let myself or Democratic officer know. So can I welcome everyone to this extraordinary meeting of the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee, which I've called so that we can consider the budget proposals for 2024-25. And we'll move straight into the agenda, beginning with agenda item 1. Are there any apologies for absence, please? Councillor Champion?
Yes. Councillor Ernest has a clash with a medical appointment, but he may be able to join later.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Councillor Hooper?
I just had a message from Councillor Ian Perry to say they'd be here in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor. So previous minutes, there actually aren't any for this meeting, and I believe the minutes for our January meeting will be with us in the next meeting. And so we move on to any declarations of interest. Are there any, please? So I need to declare a personal interest in relation to agenda item 3, telecare and social care charges. I have dispensation to speak but not to vote, and if the specific issues arise, I will remain in the meeting. Thank you. So we move on to agenda item 3, the initial budget for 24-25 and medium-term financial plan 24-25 to 28-29. This is a reference from Cabinet, and it's before us this afternoon for members to consider and comment on, with any views being referred to the corporate performance and resources scrutiny. A composite response will then be referred back to Cabinet. Just to remind committee of the Council's need to set a balanced budget. And with that, I believe Matt Baumer is here to take us through the report. So over to you, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a brief presentation to introduce this item to you. I'm going to deliver most of the content, but then on some of the detailed content in respect of environment and housing and place, I'll be handing over to Miles and Emma or to Marcus. But I'll lead in on it to start with. So the first slide, well, slide 3 actually in the presentation. Next one, please, Gareth. And I've said some of these words in a number of forums that over the last 6-9 months. It's been a really challenging budget process, and certainly many of the elements that we're reporting as pressure points. Colleagues across Wales and councils across Wales are experiencing very similar pressures, and indeed across the whole of the UK. Back in November, when we did the refresh of the medium-term financial plan, we reported cost pressures of circa £38 million. And we've had to do a huge amount of work as a council with officers and members already to mitigate those numbers down to a manageable number, a really big piece of work in itself. And actually, alongside some of the work we'll be doing in terms of delivery of savings in year, where we'll have a savings tracker, we're doing a similar piece of work on our cost pressures to make sure that the ways in which we're mitigating them will be managed, because some of those, it's not a case of just not doing something, it's a case of managing that cost pressure down. A big concern amongst those areas of cost pressures not awarded are pay. We're assuming pay awards of 4% in the strategy, but we've only put in the proposals in front of us today 3% into services budgets. So there is an informal efficiency of 1% built into budgets. Quite clearly, it's a long way to go on pay negotiations, those that haven't opened up yet nationally. And actually, the way in which inflation goes over the next couple of months will doubtless have a bearing on the outcome of that. The priorities in budget setting were set out in the strategy back in the summer, and those are prioritised funding in social care, schools and homelessness. And we've seen mitigating issues in schools, ALN growth, looked after children growth, both in terms of complexity and numbers as well as cost, and this growth in homelessness and inflation pressures alongside that as well. So we had the settlement just before Christmas, very late, and not particularly welcome either, I would guess. We had the UK budget quite late in the cycle, and so we only had the Welsh Government settlement on the 19th of December, so a lot of work's been done in the meantime. The actual settlement, disappointingly, was as anticipated, only 3.1% increase, and that's only £20,000 difference to the forecast that we made in November. There's been some upward pressure on council tax since the medium-term financial plan refresh and the modelling we were doing at that time, and some of that's been to avoid making some very difficult reductions, such as in supported bus services. The savings requirement in the report in front of you is £7.8 million. That's relatively unprecedented and as high as we've seen right through the whole austerity programme, and does indeed mask some of the underlying pressures that we're going to have to manage in dealing with cost pressures in any case. So a very similar number to last year's, but arguably more difficult to deliver. There's a mixture in there, as you won't be surprised to hear, of some tactical and some transformational savings. And naturally, the higher level of savings are in some of our discretionary services. There's significant pressures in future years too, and £9.4 million in 25/6 alone. We had the fiscal report from Cardiff University just before Christmas, commissioned by Welsh Government. That gave a couple of options for future years forecasting. We have gone with the 1% per annum. We'll be reviewing that. They did give an alternative line that was a little bit more severe and prudent as nil, absolute, so real terms cuts when you consider that the UK government's forecasts for inflation targets are in around 2%. Fees and charges, as per the strategy and the approach that we took last year, it's really important that where we have discretionary services, we're covering all our costs. And for that reason, we've continued with the strategy of increasing in line with September CPI, which for last September was 6.7%. One of the things we also talked about in the strategy in the summer was the importance of meaningful consultation throughout the whole of the budget setting process. And certainly for me, that extends to greater than just putting a set of savings proposals out in the January for public and general consultation. So the budget proposals are informed by a piece of work that the council did in the late summer. The council launched its Let's Talk About Life in the Vale survey in August. That's been run independent of the council, and it's certainly quite different to some of the surveys we've run in the past. It's not just asking residents how satisfied they are with services. It's actually seeking to understand what life is like for people in the Vale and how public services affect this. Not surprisingly, cost of living is a real issue for our residents. Over 60% have purposely not put their heating on in the 6 months prior to the survey taking place, and 44% said they couldn't pay an expected but necessary payment of £850. Residents were asked about their priorities and to rank them in importance, and actually they align with the financial strategy and the approach that we've been taking. So the top priority for 42% of the population was easily accessible care and healthcare services for when my family or I need them, and 78% of people rank this in their top 3 priorities. Second, at 26%, was buy or rent good quality homes, and just short of 50% rank this in their top 3. So it's reassuring that these are areas that the council is focusing its resources on in its budget setting. Many of you will have seen this slide in the budget training we've been doing, and I guess there's a vote of thanks for me with this one for the patience and input people have put in the planning process. It's quite relentless, isn't it? And we've barely set the budget back in March when we're off again. So we've really got into the depths of this after setting the strategy in July. We did a thorough review of cost pressures back in September, and they were initially reviewed by SLT at that time, and actually compared with similar exercises done by our neighbouring councils. We split our budget working groups into 2 rounds this year to give them a bit more capacity. So we started off by looking at cost pressures and potential areas for savings. And in the second round, got more into the savings and transformation opportunities. An extra step this year was the review and refinement of cost pressures, and that's been a really difficult part of the process, as I've already outlined. We've also had a number of meetings with the school sector, so we've met with the schools budget forum, but I've also met with head teachers and governors as well. As I said already, the second working group were on savings proposals and transformation, and then there's been further review by SLT and Business Cabinet. So quite a lengthy process, and a couple of months still to go, and quite a lot to do still. And that's really emphasised in the next slide that gives a summary of the overall position that we face at this present time. So following I'm not going to go through all the figures on this slide, you'll be glad to hear, but there's further detail in the report, of course. After the work we did mitigating cost pressures, they're still at £21 million, and that's well in excess of the increased funding we're anticipating. So the top of the table having the 3.1% increase in government grant, the council tax forecast with a modelled at a 6.7% increase, but also that number reflected an increase in the council tax base with the growing population and our assumptions around how we recover council tax. But the key drivers of the pressure still demography, growth in numbers, especially in social care, the costs of inflation that we're still experiencing, and inflation in non-pay areas as well, especially provider fees for social care. And the main area of pressure in that pressure line being the costs of homelessness that we're needing to cover, albeit short-term recovery using reserves. The next slide also appears in the report itself. And I think this really does highlight the way in which we've had to move resources around as part of budget setting. You'll see at the bottom of the columns, schools, the best part of a 5% increase into the school sector, albeit fully aware that we'd like to be able to put more in there. 13% increase in social services, really reflective of those three pressures in volume, complexity, and costs that we're seeing. And then I guess all other services and corporate resources that we're meeting with on Thursday, as well as the two service directorates covered by this meeting, really shouldering a lot of the burden of the budget challenges that we're facing, not being able to have all of their cost pressures funded, and probably taking a greater share of the savings as well. So I'm going to briefly hand over to Marcus at this point, as what we're going to now go through some of the details of the cost pressures that have been awarded in this area, and then shortly have a look at the savings. So yeah, it follows on from the comments I've just made. Little of the cost pressures that have been sought in these areas have actually come through into the proposals at this stage. So Marcus is just going to say a couple of words around this first one.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the only cost pressure in place, and I think actually under the Environment Regeneration Scrutiny Committee, which is designed to strengthen our project management function of the council. One of the issues which Matt hasn't alluded to yet, but which is becoming a real factor of the way local government is being funded, is the amount of money we've been taken out of the system, if you like, in terms of normal funding, but actually is being pumped into the system in terms of the way projects are delivered. So things like the Levelling Up Fund, the long-term plan for towns, and other funding streams around schools and highways and active travel projects mean that while we're constantly chasing our tails to try and get projects delivered, we have a lot of officers who are involved in actual project management. So we have already grown the project management team by 2 assistant officers, and this proposal, which is being partly funded by cost pressures and partly funded by the Place Directorate, but also partly funded by the income we will be intending to take out of the projects themselves, is to create a cross-directorate project management head of service who will manage projects ranging from both the sustainable communities from schools, the project management unit itself, and extending across to other major projects being delivered by the council, including projects in social services and across the other areas, major capital projects which have been largely grant funded through applications for grants. This will provide a service which actually cuts across existing directorates and ensures that the project management team and those other officers across the council who are involved in project management will have a structure to work within and ensure that some retention as well across project management, because we can rely on the expertise from different parts of the council who have been involved in this delivery of projects right across the council. And these are £1 million projects, obviously, multi-million pound projects.
Marcus. Thank you, Marcus. Did you want to come back in
that? Yes, I'll
that?
come back in for the next couple of slides. So the next slide just gives an overview of the savings proposals, the £7.8 million by directorate, and how they've fallen across the directorates. Minimal savings in the school sector, and back in November we said we were going to protect schools and not have any specific savings other than the way in which we've managed cost pressures in schools. The some limited savings in learning and skills, especially around nursery settings and income in adult and community learning and use of grant in the youth service. Yes, we've put a lot of extra funding into social services, but they are looking at efficiencies and running what they have more efficiently. So there's a review of accommodation, there's a service reviewing community care, looking at remodelling day services, introducing new charges and also expanding telecare. We'll hear more about the neighbourhood and housing in place at the moment, but as a summary, reduction in service levels, expanding charging and waste, asset reviews, looking at school crossing patrols and parking charges. In place, similarly, looking at increase in charges, and there's some restructuring of teams as well. And then in corporate resources, looking at office accommodation, looking at supplier spend, fees and charges, and there is a reduction in headcount as well. So a wide range of savings proposals across the council. As I said in the opening, there were a mixture of tactical and transformational, and the balance is with the tactical in 24/5, which we'd expect in the short term. There are some transformational, but there's also a transformational approach that came to Cabinet last month, where we're looking at service transformation, digital target operating model, strengthening communities, and generating additional economic resilience to be able to drive efficiency and lower costs for the council in the future. And that's a programme that people will hear more of over the forthcoming months. So those are that's the overview of their savings. I'm just going to hand over to Miles and Emma now, who will give an overview of the impact on environment and housing, and then go through some of the detail as well. Thank you.
Miles, just before I bring you in, can you just clarify in terms of the RAG rating that committee members and others are seeing before them? So where we're seeing, for example, amber, is that likelihood of achievement, or is that impact if achieved?
Chair,
or is it both?
Chair, it could be both. I mean, it's a case of we haven't started some of these yet. So the first one is in the report. The details of the fees and charges are already in the report. That's why it's green. Some of these require additional reports to Cabinet, additional decisions, whatever. But it shouldn't be deemed as negative. It's just that they're ready to go once the consultation is completed.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. What follows is an extract from the report. So before I ask my colleague to take you through the different savings and income generation suggestions in her directorate, I'll just set the context, if I may. You've heard Matt say that in terms of the council's challenges, we're looking to protect the vulnerable, we're looking to protect homelessness, and obviously look after our young people and children. Hence, a lot of the savings fall on this directorate. But as officers, the management team is up for the challenge. We're still positive. We still will have a budget in excess of 20 million for 24-25. So whilst this is probably one of the most challenging periods for us financially, we are still confident that we can deliver the services that our residents need, albeit in different ways. So just to give some context, page 6 of the Cabinet report explains the actual percentage of the council's budget that goes on different services. So in terms of the Directorate of Environment and Housing, it's approximately 10% of the council's overall spend. That's broken down as 8% for neighbourhood services and transport, 1% for SRS, shared regulatory services, and 1% for housing general fund. Now, in terms of the savings and income generation for the whole directorate, we've looked to protect housing general fund, which is approximately 1.9 million. And the reason for doing that is because essentially that money is there to provide support for things like homelessness. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't take money from that particular budget heading. It's a standstill situation because the demands in that area are acute and the people we are dealing with are mostly vulnerable. In terms of SRS, we had to agree with our partner authorities, with Cardiff and Bridgend, what the level of saving would be. And bear in mind, in that service area, around 95% of the overall budget is staff. So any savings there would have a direct impact on staff. So we've managed to agree across the partnership that the saving for that service for next year will be 3%. So we're hopeful in terms of that area that we can use vacant posts as a way of saving it. But again, SRS, its primary function is to protect the public. So we look to keep that as low as we could. So what that leaves is neighbourhood services and transport. So there's some principles in the work that we've done here. We're again looking to protect the vulnerable. we're looking to provide the services that the public need from us. Maybe not what they always expect, but what they need from us. We're looking at different ways of working. We're looking at embracing digital arrangements more. We're looking for involving our communities more and seeking their support. But the overall saving in that area is 1.9 million for 24-25. And I'll say this before Emma starts to take you through the detail. None of these savings and income generation suggestions are easy, but they're set in that backdrop of the challenging arrangement that we've got, and our principles are trying to protect the vulnerable and those that need our services the most. So just before I hand over to Emma, just to say that we remain positive about delivering the services our public need. As a management team, this is a challenging situation, and we know it'll be difficult for members to take decisions on these, but we've done a lot of work around this to try and reduce the impact where we can on the vulnerable, to try and protect employment where we can, but most importantly, to deliver the services that our public need and expect from us. And we are one of the best providers of quality services in things like waste and parks, for example. So with that, I'll hand over to my colleague, but it's been very difficult to get to this position. I just want members just to know that we've done our best with the suggestions we put forward, and we welcome any other suggestions members may have.
Thank you, Miles. Ella.
Thanks, Miles, and thanks, Chair. So the next 3 slides are the savings for neighbourhood services and transport. There's quite a number, but if I just run through very quickly each of them, and obviously I'm happy at the end of the presentation to take any more detailed questions on any of them that you see there this evening. So the first one is shown as green, which is increase in fees and charges. And you'll notice along with the budget report, there are a list of fees and charges which are proposed for increase. And obviously, if you have any questions on those, I can answer those later. The second one is the parking charge review. And this is looking to generate income of £100,000. And it's looking to introduce charges for resident permits, introduce charges on street in coastal resorts such as Barry Island and Penarth Esplanade. It's looking at additional car parks at the moment that aren't charged for, and it's also looking where charging might not be viable to transfer or close those car parks, and there's a 100,000 figure attached to that. The next item is to expand our in-house construction and design team, and that involves them creating additional income of £150,000. There is a risk with that because we do have falling capital budgets and the work that they receive could also fall. So we've been realistic and we think 150,000 is achievable for next year. The next item is for rationalisation of public conveniences, toilets, and there we have £100,000 potential saving, and we're looking to formally close a number of toilets that are listed there, and we're also looking to transfer to other communities or town councils some of those toilets to keep them to remain open. We'll also need to review opening hours and regimes of how we open and close those toilets. The next item is interlinked, and to look at the possibility of charges for coastal toilets. And I do say coastal toilets, so again, we're talking about Barry Island and the Penarth Esplanade as opposed to any of the town centre toilets that remain open. This figure is quite low because we'll need to take account that if we do charge for them, there'll need to be infrastructure introduced as part of that charging regime. And that it may be that income increases, but at this stage, we've kept it realistic. The next item is to review planting in parks. At the moment, we have a lot of bedding plants within our parks. We are looking to move either to longer term shrubs or to get sponsorship for some of that bedding where we can. That figure you see there is more about the plants. it doesn't really cover the staffing costs, which are covered below, because obviously when you have these plants, the costs aren't necessarily the plants, the costs are the maintenance of actually putting the plants in and keeping them watered, etc., etc. So moving down, we've got review street lighting contract and also energy costs. So we'll be looking to critically review our street lighting contract that's operating at the moment and to see if it is the most effective and efficient contract. And we will also need to reconsider again part night lighting or a reduction in the LED lighting at certain times of the evening. And again, that is something we need to do work on, and there would need to be a further report. Moving on to the next slide, we are looking to reassess our tracking information. We are currently having a high-level review done of our fleet to see where we can benefit from maybe having less vehicles in some areas, or maybe move to electric or other types of vehicles in other areas. And we're also looking to see if we can have more effective use of the fleet that we've got. So it's quite a small sum targeted there at the moment, but I think there probably would be potential for more within that area once we've done that initial piece of work. The next item is to do with our garage at the Alps and looking at additional income generation within that area. That's clearly a service transformation and quite a big service transformation for us. Initially, we're looking to change the prices we charge for MOTs to align them to what we're allowed to charge as a maximum by the government. And we're also looking to promote MOTs more to internal staff, telling them they can get their car MOT'd at the Alps, but also outside to the public. As you'll appreciate, £54.75, even at a maximum cost, doesn't always cover the total costs of an MOT. So we need to be careful about how we roll that out, and then it's the most efficient, effective use of the garage. Again, it's only £10,000 there for next year. The next item is work that will need to be promoted with the energy team in terms of looking at our vehicle chargers that we have currently within the Civic and the Alps depot. And we're looking to see if there's a potential further public use of that and a charge that can be made for that. Again, that's work in progress. I would say that 7,000 is ambitious, in that a lot of people who have electric vehicles do charge at home as opposed to charging elsewhere. But again, I think it's something we've got the infrastructure there. It's something we've got to look at and see if it is worthwhile. The next one is to review our school crossing patrol service. It's a non-statutory service. We're not required to provide it. There are approximately 11 part-time posts within that service at the moment, and we're looking to speak to schools to see if there is any potential that they could take on that school crossing patrol service to start with, or whether we have to consider a gradual changing of that service, and that would mean a loss of posts. Very difficult decision, but again, it is a non-statutory function, and we have had to look at all of our non-statutory functions. The next item is to look at increasing income charges for our highway development teams. So that's where we have works done either on highway via what we call a Section 278 agreement, or in estates, which we call a Section 38 agreement. And we're looking to maximise the amount of income that we have from there. And the charges on fees and charges do reflect that, and they would be that money would be over and above what we've already put in for the fees and charges. Again, a bit like the construction and design income, there's a risk because we're really struggling to recruit to that area, to those areas, particularly at the salaries that we're offering. Local government isn't, and civil engineering in particular, isn't that attractive to a lot of youngsters coming out of universities. And so we're going to have to play sort of a double act there, try to get people to want to come and work for us, and also then to bring the income in. So that, again, is a risk. The next item is additional concessions. We already have a number of concessions that were delivered by some transformation work we did a few years ago. And by concessions, I mean commercial concessions. So that might be a food truck here or there, or a coffee outlet somewhere else. So those concessions, we're looking for additional ones of those. And again, we've put in a potentially additional £20,000 for that. The next item is really challenging. It's for me to basically look at all the various vacant posts we've got and to delete some of those. That's quite challenging because quite often those posts are vacant because we can't recruit, not because they're not needed. So it's very challenging. And we need, I need to be very wary of those posts that I delete, because once they're gone, they're gone. Next slide. Next item is to limit the black bags that you can take at any one time at Barry and Llandau civic amenity sites. This is twofold, really. One is that hopefully it will mean that people will split black bags a bit better and place the products into recycling, as opposed to just putting them in the black bag and taking them to one of the 2 civic amenity sites. But it also will create a saving to us in that we will have less cost associated with that black bag disposal. Again, a small figure attracted to that, but something that meets 2 of our objectives moving forward. The next item is just £15,000, and it relates to looking at our winter maintenance gritting routes. It's likely for next year that we'd be looking at one less gritter and making more efficient the routes that we do at the moment. But we also may need to look at whether there are any areas that we can not salt anymore. Now that will be quite controversial and will require a review. Next item is waste collections at flats and apartments. So at the moment, in flats and apartments, though that waste is collected, black bag waste is collected every 2 weeks. We're looking to move to 3 weeks collections to align it with other domestic collections in waste. The figure you see there is related to a vehicle and crew. So it would be dropping a vehicle and crew, although that's not staff, it would be agency, or they'd be redeployed somewhere else. It's quite challenging because we would need to deal with the landowners in those areas and encourage them or try to make them have the right recycling equipment within their areas, so that their people that they represent can actually put their recycling into a recycling box rather than just doing black bags. But it is something we need to move towards, again, twofold: saving and also potentially assist us with our statutory recycling target. The next item is what I term a budget transfer, but we will not be, or we will be, at the moment we actually heavily subsidise the service we provide in terms of grass cutting to our schools. Obviously, as a division, we can't really be doing that. If we do provide a service such as grass cutting to schools or to any other party, we need to be ensuring that we're covering our costs on that. So that 50,000 reflects that move to cost recovery. The next item is quite a large item, 140,000. It's removing our green flag park status from our council parks. In essence, people always say to me, what is a green flag park over what is a normal park? And a green flag park basically has a higher presence of people there and has a higher level of maintenance. However, a normal park also has quite a bit of maintenance and quite a bit of presence there. So we're looking to move to a more mobile arrangement where people wouldn't just be based in, say, one park, they would be based in several parks. They do one job in one park, then move to another park, then maybe move to another park. So here, it will be a service standard reduction. I don't want to not make that unclear. It will be a lesser service standard, and there will be a reduction in agency staff, and we will have less resource to react to queries that we might receive or complaints we might receive about parks issues. There's also a risk here that we could potentially, if you don't have staff at parks, that you may have more antisocial behaviour. We could have more vandalism. And again, that's something we're going to need to do our best to try and design out when we do this service review. Alley gates in Barry and Penarth. Alley gates is an alley gate review. A lot of our alley gates are coming to the end of their life. We have a large number of alley gates right across the Vale. Next year we're going to be reviewing the provision of those alley gates. So we're not saying here we're going to be taking them all out, but we are going to be reviewing that provision, and we're going to need to see in future years what we're going to be able to maintain and what we're not going to be able to maintain moving forward. We may also look at speaking to the communities involved to see if they want to take more ownership of those alley gates. That will be challenging and very difficult to implement. But again, it's a non-statutory provision. It's something we need to look at. The next item is reviewing our business support, and that's our Directorate Business Support in terms of performance, commercial opportunities and finance review. At the moment, we have business support both within housing and under Miles's area, and we need to basically review that business support to check that it's fit for purpose for the business moving forward. So we need to check we've got the right skills in the right places to deliver what we need to deliver moving forward, which is a much reduced service. So moving on to the last slide, we're looking at expansion of our commercial recycling collections, particularly in light of the changes to the regulations on the 1st of April this year. We are pulling together a team, a council-wide team, to try to deliver that sales pitch to people, so hopefully, and to businesses, and hopefully we'll be able to have a larger impact on that and be a larger provider for that service area. Again, that's shown in 2 years, 50,000 next year and 50,000 year after. It is very much a change to the operating model. We do pick up commercial waste at the moment, but we're looking to move to much more of that now and to take advantage of the infrastructure and the excellent performance that we already have within that area and move that to the private sector. Review of street cleansing service. This is a large amount as well, so I'd like to perhaps spend a bit of time on this. It's 191,000. What that figure means is that there will be less staff. There will be no dedicated town sweepers. All sweepers will be mobile, and they will move a bit like the parks from place to place. On top of that, we're looking to move bins that are abused, and there are a lot of them within residential areas. So whereby bins are used to people to put their domestic waste in, as opposed to just their dog poo bag or their cup or their sweet wrapper. We've had a lot of that. We have already taken out a number of bins, but we just can't sustain that longer term. We just don't have the finance to do that or the staffing to do it. So we will be looking to remove around 50% of those bins within residential areas, and we will be looking to move the sweeping and cleansing service to a more mobile service. That will mean, again, like the parks, that there's less chance of immediate reaction. So if I get a call, there's an extra bag by this bin, normally we would try and meet that request pretty quickly, but we will be changing our service standards, and we'll obviously update you on all of those as we move forward. The last item for me there is the deployment of an additional enforcement car, always a popular popular edition. We are in the process of looking at purchasing an additional enforcement car, so we'd have 2, and obviously the income there, which is why I've put it as very small, is dependent on compliance with traffic orders. At the end of the day, I would like everybody to be complying with the traffic orders that are in place, and I'd like to see the enforcement car not getting anybody, but in reality, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. We are also an advanced stage of looking to undertake other enforcement functions, such as looking at the work for tax with the DVLA, and we're also looking at moving traffic offences, which Cardiff, as an adjoining authority, already have. Merthyr Council are just moving to them now. So I would expect a report to come before you or before Cabinet in the next few months on that. So I think that's me, and I'll hand over to Marcus.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Chair. Yes, in respect of place, you will see that the savings required, obviously, as a smaller directorate are 300,000. No easier to find, I'm afraid, because the place directorate is a mostly staff costed directorate. We have limited assets, and therefore, so most of our savings are focused on some of the staff that we have in place. If I run through some of these savings, or the savings that are identified in the presentation. The first is a review of our facilities contracts, and essentially that is getting out of our lease for the Vale Enterprise Centre and removing the liabilities that places upon us. The Vale Enterprise Centre is unfortunately now well beyond its usable life. It is going to cost us considerable ongoing sums to continue to maintain. And while it is a loss of business space for businesses, it was continually year on year costing the council significant sums, well in excess of what we were achieving through rental income. So we are at the end stages of getting out of that lease, and that in long term will save us considerable sums. The sum that's pointed to it now is the sum of the actual officer who was monitoring and looking after that building. That was an agency officer, and we will be losing that post. The next item is a review of attractions in the country parks, and specifically the Cosmoston and the staff members who are associated with the medieval village, and that is basically reducing the staff coverage so that the medieval village remains as an attraction, but we no longer have any staff covering or serving the facility. Things like the maintenance around it will be carried on by this stage carried on by existing ranger cover, but we will be closing the reception and the staffing facilities that go with the medieval village. The next item is a review of our planning fee income, and includes planning performance agreements, and that is increasing the targets for planning fee submissions, and also seeking more agreements with applicants around their pre-application submissions, which we can actually charge for separately, and that would just raise the fees that we're looking to bring in by approximately £20,000. We have in Regeneration a general budget cut of around about £21,000. This means that some of our working budgets around regeneration work have now been pretty much cut to zero. We will be relying on securing grants and other forms of funding to do some of the work that we normally have used reserves for. The tourism and marketing budget has been cut by £15,000. And that actually only leaves £10,000 in our publicity budget for the whole of the Vale. We will be using some of the grants secured, such as the Shared Prosperity Fund and other funding streams to, at least in the next year, supplement that. Obviously, the Shared Prosperity Fund ends in March 2025, and there is no announcement of what comes after that, so we can't guarantee what we'll have beyond that time. We have a facilities administration role, which will cease, That is £15,000. That role actually is currently carried out again by agency staff, and the requirements from that role will be picked up by the remaining members of the Regeneration team. We've got a general budget cutting across planning of £11,000. We have the removal of the business support post, which is actually a vacant post, which saves £33,000. We're currently in discussions with Dunraven Estates around how we operate the Dunraven Estate and the Heritage Coast facilities at Dunraven Beach. And through those discussions, we are hoping to save £40,000. I mentioned the closing of the reception at Cosmoston. That will include additional loss of staff, and that's adding up to £36,000. The building control team will be looking to generate an additional £10,000 of income on building control fees. We're also looking at exploring opportunities for further income generation in the country parks, including additional concessions, expanding the parking area, and lease renewals on facilities that exist in the country parks now, and any other opportunities. We've attributed £20,000 to that. And then finally, the introduction of ANPR cameras to the country parks in respect of the parking charges. We've attributed £20,000 to that because of the current leakage we're experiencing with people who aren't paying for the parking charges. Once you implement ANPR, obviously you cannot get out of the park unless you've paid your parking fee. So we're expecting there to be a general increase in the charges we see from parking. And that's the place savings.
Thank you. Are we
Last couple
done?
of slides, and then, then we'll move to questions. So we did highlight some unfinished work in the report, and the key area is the use of reserves. We did have a really thorough review of our reserves last year, and we signalled we need to be doing similar this. And I guess some of that drive is from the current financial year and the unplanned use of reserves, especially in social services and the rundown of those need to be replenished, not least because of the cost pressures we're experiencing in that area. We have continued the policy that we did last year, where we believe pressures to be transitory and not permanent, that we would use reserves on a one-off basis, and we'll continue to do that on homelessness and energy. Certainly grappling with the homelessness challenge of the councils is difficult, and I can see a time when we're going to have to base budget some of those pressures, and that will put pressure on the council's overall finances. You can't continue to fund a service from reserves indefinitely. We do, though, and I've talked earlier in the presentation about the 5 themes of transformation going forward. We do need, as a council, to make sure we have resources to be able to fund and support those programmes. So it's important that risk reshaping investment and digital reshaping are properly provided for. But certainly when you see the final report coming through, published just over a couple of weeks, I need to get right in that already, don't I? We will see some additional reserves set aside for social services, and also aligned to what I was saying earlier around the savings programme of £7.8 million and the challenges of delivering it. We're not setting ourselves up not to deliver, but it would be imprudent not to set some reserves around in terms of risk of non-delivery of savings. So that's still to do that. That review is pretty much complete and needs to be written up for the final report. And then just final slide, next steps. So we kicked off public consultation and a scrutiny review of proposals on the 19th of January. This is the 4th of 5 scrutiny meetings looking at the proposals in detail. And as you said at the outset, Chair, we'll corporate resources on Thursday that will put all the comments together and feed those back to Cabinet. The public consultation finishes on the 16th, end of the week. And we've also been meeting with other partners, including trade unions and the Public Services Board during this period as well. A final report will go back to Cabinet on the 29th. And then later that month, well, probably very early the following month, March, we'll have the final Welsh Government settlement, which inconveniently is a couple of days before the UK settlement. So there are some things the Welsh Government are going to have to do at a slight element of risk. And then those proposals will go forward for Council to approve the budget on the 6th of March. Thank you. Thanks for listening, and obviously we're all on hand to take any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you all, and thank you for providing us with such detailed information, and indeed for the work that you've done to address what are clearly significant challenges that the Council is facing, along with every other local authority in Wales. So it's reassuring to hear that the Council's focusing its resources and priorities on those things that most matter to residents. Also reassuring to hear that the Council can still deliver the services that are needed, albeit in a different way and with a different focus, as you've outlined so clearly. And that's a long list of proposed issues and changes for committee to consider. And just to remind you again, the Council does have to ensure that it delivers a balanced budget. And in terms of the discussion that we need to have, I know it can be tempting to stray into other areas, but I do want to ensure that we focus our discussion on those matters that are particularly relevant to this committee, because as has already been explained, there's been an opportunity to consider wider issues at other scrutinies. So, any questions or comments from committee members? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to thank those who've come tonight with the presentation, because this is clearly a tough budgeting round, and I think you've all borne the scars by the looks of things as well. So I want to thank you for your work. I've got quite a long list of things that I'd like to go through, Chair, so if you'd bear with me. On a general point, I think we are seeing the impact of councils being the poor relation when it comes to public services. So we're taking the impact. So this is something that people are seeing at a level, which I think is really an important point to reference. So the UK government are passing their savings onto Welsh government and therefore onto local authorities. So this is where the pinch really hits as well. So I think that's worth making. We talk about inflation, and we've used an inflation rate of 6.7%. Today's inflation rate is around 4%. So when we're talking about the costs that are increasing, including council tax, it is quite different to what we're dealing with at the moment. The real rate of inflation is much less. I make this point every year that I've been here 2 years. We've got cost pressures on base. When we need to, if we're really going to be serious about looking at the way that we reference our new budgets, we do need to consider zero-based budgeting. I think that's an investment that's worthy of doing and worthy of taking account of quickly. Transformation, we referenced transformation, but I really think there's an opportunity as well to look at how it impacts on net zero commitments. So this is a transformation for us to stop doing things that will have net zero consequences. So there's some overlap there, but I didn't see that in the transformation budget and would have wanted to. I'm really concerned. We referenced the fact that agency staff are, they're almost completely indispensable to us as a council. And I think that's an awful place to start, because agency staff, like our own staff, have families to support, and they're in the same position as we are as well. So I would urge us not to use that as it's okay, they're agency staff. That isn't the way we need to take about this. I'm going to make some further points about vulnerability. And the chair referenced the fact that she's pleased that we're making sure we're covering the vulnerable. I'm not convinced that's the case. There are a number of places in this scrutiny committee where vulnerable people will be the people who get impacted first and hardest. A question, Matt, for you when it comes to, I'm just interested in confidence. You talked about budget figures. So we've got a £7.8 million budget saving. The confidence, you're putting in a budget risk line, which I think is appropriate. But I'm just interested in, is the 7.8 actually the total amount? Because we've also got what looks like a 1% difference between the pay award and what we've put into the budget. So is that an extra risk that we need to manage on top of that? If it is the case, or is it actually what we're talking about is a reduction in full-time equivalent? So I'd be really interested in digging down and understanding that.
Councillor Hooper, forgive me interrupting you. No, I'm not going to stop you with your list, but I don't want the list to be so long that it's actually difficult for us to address it. So we've got some. We've got.
Break it down for Matt.
Hang on. We've got some questions which I think will be for Matt, other issues which are for other officers. So I will bring you back in, but if you could just
I will do.
foreshorten what you're doing, and if you need to come back in later, you can.
Chair, with respect, we get criticised often in this council for not bringing items to bear at scrutiny committees. So I'm making sure that these points are being raised now. So I will, there is a long list. I did warn you at the start. These first points are ones for Matt to take on. I will break if that's appropriate and then talk about the other parts of the...
As I said, Councillor Hooper, I'm not stopping you. For the sake of debate and clarity, it's important that we deal with these issues clearly so that officers are able to respond to them. So that's fine. I'm just asking you to bear that in mind, Councillor Hooper. I'm not stopping you from raising the issues that you want to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to make the point in support of homelessness. Matt, you made the point of homelessness isn't a transitory cost. This is a cost that we need to put into our budgets in the future. I'm surprised it's not there now. Can I leave those? So I'd be interested in Matt's take on that first point, and then if I can come back in for the others, I welcome it.
Yeah. So thank you. I suspect some of them might be broader than you, Matt. And I just want to comment on the point that was made about agency staff. I didn't hear that there was any view within the council that agency staff somehow mattered less. What I heard is that there are sometimes very real pressing constraints, which means the council have to rely on agency staff, but I'll allow officers to respond to that. But Matt, if you'd like to come in on those points initially, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll pick up a couple of points. The CPI is a really tough one, isn't it? But the thing with the CPI, and yes, the numbers are down, but they're still going up. And we experienced all of last year up to September, year on year, where they'd increased by 6.7%. So prices aren't going down, it's not easing. Those costs are already impacting upon us, and it is appropriate that when we're attempting to recover our costs that we use that 6.7%. But doubtless we could have a lengthy debate about inflation here. I take your point around zero-based budgeting, and certainly with our budget setting approach this last 2 years, we haven't done that in name, but we have got a little bit closer to it. When we've been having our budget working groups, we haven't just been having a look at where we're trying to save and just looking around the margins, which you would be doing with your marginal budgeting, but we've been actually getting back into the depths of what is the money actually spent on. Staying on this time, isn't it? We do have challenges with capacity.
Sorry, we're just having some mic problems, so we'll just make sure that we resolve those, and then Matt, you'll be able to continue once we've sorted that out. Thank you for your patience, committee members.
Shall I move seat? Thank you. So we do have some limits with we are naturally, as a local authority, we are limited with capacity, so we'll do as much as we can within the finance team and across services on that, so that we really do have a thorough review of costs when we are setting the budget. But we are certainly moving in that direction. I'll take your comment about transformation and net zero back. I don't have an answer for that this afternoon. The chair's picked up the point on agency. I think we've certainly in our budget proposals done everything we can to protect the most vulnerable. That is a big challenge. It's a large chunk of our residents, and I guess time will tell how effective our proposals have been. Then you did have a specific couple of questions, and I have sought to be as transparent as I could when I was introducing the report, but I probably need to say a bit more. So we do have two really big risks with this budget this year. Not only do we have the £7.8 million savings programme, we have also done a really massive piece of work to mitigate and manage £38 million of cost pressures down to 21. Some of those, as said in the intro, will have been directors putting proposals for growth and investing in their services, and where we've simply said no, there is no financial risk as such. There's a service risk, but there isn't a financial one because we've not entertained building those numbers into our budget. But some of them will be requiring managers to mitigate. And so for that reason, alongside having a savings tracker and framework to deliver our savings, we'll be making sure some of those pressures that haven't been awarded are actually mitigated downwards as well. That includes not fully funding the pay award. There's a bit of me, if inflation continues coming down, despite our difference of opinion about inflation, you might see employers not offering 4%. And if there was a 3% pay award, then we've put enough in the budget, haven't we? But notwithstanding that, there's a built-in efficiency in services, and services will have to look at managing vacancies and other means that they've done to manage their budgets in the past to deal with that shortfall. The homelessness. So at the moment, the full cost of the homelessness pressures on the council are in the budget, but we are funding that on a temporary basis through the homelessness reserve. And what I was trying to say in my earlier introduction is when we come to the 25-6 budget or the 26-7 budget, that may no longer be possible. But you'll have seen the council's housing strategy. It is very committed to delivering more homes and addressing the pressures, especially that we see on social and private rental housing. So there's a better supply, which will alleviate homelessness. But I totally understand what a huge challenge that is to grapple with. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I can see, Marcus, you wanted to come in, and I assume it's also to comment on some of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was, obviously I did refer to the agency role when I referred to our savings with respect to the facilities role. We have very few agency staff. We actually only generally now use agency staff where either we can't fill a post because we tried and we can't get anyone, or the role is actually for a part-time or limited attendance at the office type of role. In this particular case, you'll notice that it's £15,000. So it's a role which is relatively short term, and we did struggle to find anyone to do the role. But we have taken the view where we have these sort of specialist roles, we've tended to use agency staff because we just struggle to fill posts where they're not 37 hours or even slightly shorter, because there just aren't people out there who are interested in them. Or with the specialist skills either. I think one of the things we are trying to do in the future is to look at how we advertise roles going forward to make them as flexible as possible. But in this particular case, this has been a role, and it's not denigrating the fact that the staff are agency or not. It doesn't make it really any easier to actually go through the process, because once they've been Once they're in a role, there's a statutory process to go through whether they're agency or not. It's just pointing out that that particular role was agency. So just wanted to make that clear. They're not looked upon any differently to any other member of staff. It's just that in some cases we have struggled to fill posts and fill roles, but perhaps not 37 hours, and are quite specialist.
Thank you, Marcus. You're quite crackly when you're speaking. We can just about understand you, but just to make you aware that it's not the clearest line that we're getting. Councillor Hoop, I know you want to come back in. I'm going to bring you back in, but we'll have another committee member who's been waiting some time to speak. So, Councillor Prothero, if you'd like to come in next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt, Miles, and Emma as well for and Marcus for all the work you've been doing. Appreciate it's been a very, very difficult budget this year. My question, or rather my statement, if that's okay, is for Emma, and it's to do with a very small amount of money that could potentially be raised by what you're proposing, and that's charging for toilets in coastal areas. It's maybe I'm just speaking as a female resident. It's one of those things that I feel is such a for me it should be a public right. It's about health. It's about dignity for elderly people, people with medical conditions, children. Even I just don't think that the use of a toilet should ever be something they have to pay for. And I believe that, other residents may feel the same way that I do. And seeing as we are talking about such a small amount of money that we could potentially raise by doing this, I don't understand why we would want to upset people in this way. It doesn't make sense to me. So it's really just a statement of that I feel that particular issue is something that we shouldn't be pursuing. That's all. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. I had a question on that as well, if I may, Emma, before you respond. So in terms of the proposal that's on the table around charging for toilets, would that include disabled toilets, or would they be exempt? Apologies to councillors and committee members who are joining us online. We're just sorting out a mic issue. So please bear with us. You haven't lost your connection if you're hearing silence.
That one's working. Sorry, just move across.
Thank you.
Without my stuff, so bear with me. In terms of the toilets, there's two proposals. One is to look at rationalisation of the toilets and to review the provision. And the other is perhaps more controversial, to look at charging, particularly within coastal areas. And obviously, Councillor Prothero has raised the issue in terms probably of the toilets that are particularly within Ogmore by Sea, because they would be regarded as coastal toilets. You could have an option if you felt as a committee that you wanted to recommend to try and find that £5,000 within the general toilet review that we're doing. So there is that possibility. I think we're not proposing to charge for all toilets. We're just proposing to charge for the ones on the coast. So mainly we're not looking at impacting residents. Mainly we're looking more at people that come to visit the area, that they actually pay for the facilities that they're using, and assist the massive bills we have in terms of cleansing those facilities and also maintaining those facilities. But if you felt strongly about that, obviously that 5,000 has to go somewhere. So if it doesn't go there, then you'd obviously need to think as a committee whether it could go somewhere else and whether you have another proposition. We would do an equalities impact assessment. So your point, Chair, about disabled access and would there be a charge for that, we'd need to do that equalities impact assessment and how that would, you know, I couldn't say at the moment how that would turn out. But we wouldn't be alone in looking at this. There are lots of other coastal authorities, lots of other authorities who do charge. It's just a case of whether that is something that people think fits with the council moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Prothero, did you want to come back in on that?
Thank you ever so much, Chair, and thank you, Emma, for that. If you are going to do an EIA, can I also ask you to look at the gendered situation? Because as us women, we would know that we are resigned to the fact that we have to queue for cubicles, and also now possibly pay if we do go down that road in coastal areas, whereas the males have urinals. So these things, it's a gendered issue as well, I believe, not just a disability issue. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hooper, did you want to come back in and continue to it through your list? Apologies to committee members and councillors who are online. I'm afraid we are experiencing some difficulties with mics, so we're just sorting out a mic for Councillor Hooper.
My name.
Try now. That's it, you're live.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to come back in. I've got a couple of questions now relating to the directorates themselves. The first one on parking charges. And we talked about protecting the vulnerable. I'd be really interested to understand where we think these parking charges will land, because if you have a driveway, if you have a garage, you don't need to pay for a parking permit. So those people who are forced onto the roads, who tend to be, could well be poorer, and I'd be interested in understanding whether or not this hits people who are more vulnerable, particularly in the centre of Barry and Barry Island. Toilet closing, echo Councillor Prothero's point, this does impact women, families with children, disabled disproportionately. So I think this is something that we really need to get a handle on. I think that the resorts toilets are just for people who come and use us as for tourism completely gets, you know, this is used by local people all the time, and there are local people who live on Barry Island and other parts of the resorts in Barry Island in my ward. And we're also talking about other parts of the community that are losing their facilities in their entirety, like Park Crescent, for example, amongst others. A few specific questions, just because I think this is important to work out. So when we talk about MOTs, I wonder how many MOTs we actually do at the moment. And if there's a cost, if we don't recover the cost, I do not understand at all why we are thinking of adding more MOTs to the roster, because surely that will just end up with a loss, an increasing loss to the facility rather than a profit. When we talk about charging, utilising the charging points, I think this is all about speed. So I'd be really interested in the speed of the charging points that we've got in the Alps and the Vale offices. Black bags at amenity sites, you know, how many do people currently put in there at the moment? I think that would be interesting. We're restricting it from what to what? I think it was referenced, but just so we can pick that up. Gritters, the change in gritters, how is that impacted with climate changes? So are we likely to see more severe, less frequent, but more severe, or actually more frequent severe weather effects, and therefore do we need more provision rather than less provision? Is there a real risk that we get this wrong and then have to reverse that decision at a later point? the waste collection at flats, we're talking about effectively landlocked flats. These people do not have the capability of storing extra bin bags for an extra week. I think they struggled, as we know, when we went from 2 weeks to 1 week. So working that through, I think Emma referenced it in her, that this will be difficult. I think this will be extremely difficult. I'll be really interested in just getting beneath that a bit. Grass cutting in schools, I'm just worried that we're not going to add a capex cost onto schools where they have to go and buy the mowers. Are you going to lend them the mowers or charge them for lending the mowers? What's going to happen with that? Or they're going to have to get their own equipment. Street cleaning and limiting bins, when we're talking about bin misuse, isn't the thing we need to be doing is solving the bin misuse issue and putting some enforcement activity into that, rather than just taking the bins away, because most people who use the bins use it in the right way and not in a way that is inappropriate. And the last question from Emma and Miles, the enforcement car, and just a question about, we've got a 10k saving in this. Is this the incremental benefit of that car? So obviously you're paying for the car, the driver, so they're expecting to get 10k further. 3 questions for Miles.
Can we pause?
Yep.
And let's just take this group of questions first. And I do have another committee member who's waiting to come in, so I'll bring them in, and then we'll bring you back in, Councillor Hooper. But let's deal with these first set of questions first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper, for your questions. I'm just going to whiz. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hooper, for your questions. I'm just going to whiz through them. Some of them I will need to come back on. Parking charges, there will be a further report on charging for parking permits. So that should cover your questions about the impact on people who don't have driveways and the impact on the highway as well. So we'll come back to that. It is about administration costs as opposed to us making money. It's a non-statutory service, so we don't have to provide it. We don't have to do this. We could just open up our streets as a free-for-all. So what we are trying to do is trying to retain that service by putting in an administration charge for that if somebody wants to have that permit. But there will be a further report on that. In terms of toilet charges, I picked up most of the points previously. I noticed you mentioned Park Crescent. The aim at Park Crescent would be to close the existing toilets, but I'd be looking at potentially a redevelopment there, a transformation of that building to incorporate a public toilet. So hopefully that would give you some reassurance if we could do that and take that forward. MOTs, I don't have the numbers before me this evening. I do have the numbers, but I can't remember them off the top of my head, so I don't want to not tell you about that. For us, it's about using the garage to its most effectiveness. So if we've got an MOT charger there and there is work there, if we've got somebody who does MOTs and there is the opportunity for additional work, we want to use them to the maximum capacity. So we want to ensure that that garage is used as much as possible. In terms of a speed of charges, again, I will get this wrong, but I will try. Some are 7 kilowatts. We do have some 50 kilowatt ones as well. Again, if you want me to come back on that, I can do. Black bags at the recycling centres. At the moment, we do split black bags at the Barry Centre, so we are checking each of those black bags as they come in to check there's no recycling products within it that can be put somewhere else as opposed to just out for general refuse. At Landau, we don't have that same permission, so we are finding that we're getting more black bags at Landau, so hence the need to restrict and hence the need to look at that. I don't know what numbers, I can probably give you some tonnage on that as opposed to numbers of black bags. In terms of gritters, I take your point about climate change. I'm hoping that the impact of that particular saving will be one less gritter and more efficient routes. So I'm hoping that we will still be doing a similar amount of routes that we're doing at the moment, just with one less gritter. In terms of climate change, if we get more frost, we obviously use additional amounts of salt, and we obviously have intelligence about that to see if we need to drop 10 grams, 20 grams, whatever we need to drop. So I'm hoping that we would cover that climate change issue moving forward. I suppose my bigger concern would be the use of those gritters maybe at removing floods moving forward, as well as the ice impact. In terms of waste collection at flats, generally that is the landlord's responsibility. So it is going to be a discussion for us to have with those landlords to ensure that they're putting the proper bins out, the proper recycling bins, and moving forward, that there is more recycling done there and less black bag waste. So it seems, it's right to move there to continue to hit our target. But it is going to be challenging. But we are looking to move that forward. And you are receiving next month a detailed report on the waste service, which went to Cabinet on the 18th of January. So Colin Smith will be here, and you can ask him some more challenging questions about that, about that particular saving. In terms of grass cutting from schools, no, we're not suggesting we're going to lend them our equipment or anything like that. Our health and safety and everything else rings.
Sorry, it's about Nolan.
No, Councillor Hooper, please hang on. Please continue, Emma.
Is that all right?
Yeah, please continue.
So what we're actually doing is to look at cost recovery for that service that we provide at the moment. So at the moment, we provide it at a cheaper cost to the schools to the sum of about £50,000 a year. Now, we can remove that team and the schools can obviously procure their own service, or we can provide it at the cost that it actually costs us. So I think that was the answer to your question on that. In terms of cleansing, I take your point about enforcement. We're going to be busy enough with enforcement just taking out 50% of the bins. It's very, very difficult to use covert surveillance to actually see people putting these black bags by or other rubbish by these bins. And quite often, even though our enforcement will go out when there's a number of black bags by those bins, we quite often can't find evidence. So we are in a position where we will be doing enforcement. That will be one of our sticks, but we'll also be taking these bins out because there is a lot of abuse, unfortunately, of them. In terms of enforcement income, it's actually income from the car. So the £10,000 is income, additional income from the car, 2 cars being out rather than 1 car being out. So it's that would be net income. And the service itself at the moment, just to let you know, pays for itself. So I'm actually looking just to get a little bit more income out of that moving forward. But if everybody complies, then obviously we would look to rationalise those enforcement cars moving forward. To connect to net zero, because I know you asked a question about that earlier, we are looking at an electric car to use the chargers that are based at the Alps office. So hopefully that answers your questions.
Thank you, Emma. And clearly, much of what you've described is subject to review. So these are proposals that are on the table, and there will be more detail that will come forward in various reports across the coming months. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Penn, thank you for your patience. You wanted to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Oh. I've got one question, but more just comments, really. I think I'm proud of the things that we are prioritising and the people that we're prioritising. The 0.5% council tax increase, which is ring fenced to support bus routes, I think is really good. And I believe, this is my only question, is that's match funded by Welsh Government. I think we've got to sort of ask ourselves what we prioritise and who we prioritise when our budgets are forever ever strained, reducing things like public bin emptying, street cleaning, picking up leaves in the autumn, etc. If those savings protect the most vulnerable in our budgets and that money can go somewhere else, then I think that's a really effective use of our savings. 7.8 million savings will have an impact, and can I thank all the officers for their hard work. I know it must be really difficult within their departments. I think if we'd followed budget proposals at last year's budget meetings from oppositions, we'd be in an even bigger hole than we actually are. Our reserves would be less, and the holes in our budgets we'd be facing would be even greater. English councils are being pushed to sell off assets. Michael Gove is pushing English councils to sell off assets to the tune of 23 billion. And I know a lot of councils have earmarked libraries, civic halls, swimming pools, community centres for sale to balance their books. I don't recall Welsh Government leaning on local government in Wales to do the same. It shows a big difference on how Welsh Government has protected councils in Wales. And last, I think we need to remember why we are in this position. Councillor Hooper mentioned inflation, and Matt touched on it in his response. We are in this position because of inflation, and all the pressures that our departments are facing. A lot of them are inflationary. It's inbuilt into the system already. In my work, building supplies, those price increases have not disappeared. They are in the system. And admittedly, inflation has come down, as Councillor Hooper mentioned, but that's not making prices reduce. It just means they're going up at a slightly lesser rate. But those increases are already with us. A perfect example is school budgets. All the schools showing deficits would actually have balanced budgets if it wasn't for inflation. It's a perfect example of why we're in this situation. Those are my comments. The only question was, is the 0.5% council tax increase ring fence for bus route support match funded by Welsh Government? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So for members of the public, this is reference to the 470,000, which it is proposed the council will use to support non-commercial bus routes that will benefit people within rural communities for whom those buses are a lifeline, but it isn't just rural communities that will benefit. That's my understanding in relation to that funding. That's not a statutory services. I think that's an example of a decision, again, that the council has made trying to prioritise those issues that matter to residents. But Emma, can you respond to that specific question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's been really difficult with bus services since COVID, really. There's been patronage decline, quite significant patronage decline in the industry. And as a consequence, companies have been struggling to make services viable. So the £470,000 that is potentially suggested as being ring-fenced in this budget is a very, 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 very small proportion of the money that we will be getting from Welsh Government and other sources. So the likely total cost of supported buses from the 1st of April for that financial year is likely to be in the region of 2.7 million. So that includes our 470,000, but it also includes a significant rise in support from Welsh Government. So that this year, if I just give you an example for this year, the cost is around 900,000. So we're actually talking a threefold increase in the cost of supported services. And it's not just supported services. We have had services such as the X2 that runs from Bridgend through to Cardiff. That service used to be commercial, with the exception of a couple of services in the evening. Now it's not commercial anymore, and we're having to try to find the funding to ensure that those communities and some of those rural communities maintain that service. We've got other supported services in the rural areas, such as the 321, which runs from Pontyclun down to Lanswick Major via some of the rural communities there again. That, again, is a supported service which, you know, without this money, we wouldn't be able to have. So it's really challenging times. The 2.7 million is for 1 year. We are going to be facing the same issues potentially next year unless people get on the bus. So my message tonight is please use the buses, because if we need to be trying to make as many of those buses commercial so that we're not having to subsidise them. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Emma. And buses form part of the forward work programme of this committee. So again, that's another example of an issue where committee members will be receiving a report and have the opportunity to consider that issue in more detail in the coming months. We've had a really long debate and discussion about this. I'm conscious that we have another report before us this evening. So I just want to check, are there any final comments from councillors in relation to this agenda item? If not, I will summarise. Councillor Perry, please.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Councillor.
Good. Just to go over what a few people said, just reinforce, I think charging for toilets isn't a great thing. I think it would be really, really unpopular and unfair. So you also mentioned very briefly part night or dimmer street lighting, which is something we looked at before and could be introduced. It's unpopular with some people, but it's good it's been looked at. You know, I've got some residents in my rural areas concerned about a lack of gritting already. So I think they're going to be a little bit concerned if we're going to have less gritting. And of course, there's an environmental impact of gritting as well. But that's something to be really careful about. Street cleaning, wouldn't it be great if people didn't drop litter? Yeah, we've got a huge problem with littering in the rural Vale and all parts of the Vale. So again, we need to be careful. Yes, it's all really, really grim. So I want to thank everybody who spoke before me for bringing up some very, very good points, and just to make sure I agree with almost everything that's been said. It's grim times, isn't it? But look forward to tax cuts in March.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hooper, one final comment from you, because as I say, I do feel we've had a lengthy debate and I do want to get on to the next report. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. But Scrutiny is here for a reason, so I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to officers. These are for on Marcus's budget. So I think 3 questions. The first one, he relates to a general budget cutting in planning of £11,000. Is that just, does he have specifics on that? I'd be interested to know what they are. We've also got a replacing, on the reference shared prosperity funding, where he's using that, what seemed to be to replace an existing function. I thought shared prosperity funding was for all new activities, so just welcome some reflections on that. And just a general point, I feel like we're making our parks, particularly Cosmoston in this regard, less attractive, but yet expecting to be able to generate more income. They're two sides of, it seems to be, you know, either side of the same coin, and we're clearly making a big leap of faith if we expect that to happen. So I'd welcome some thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Marcus, if you're there, do you want to come in on those issues? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hooper. In respect of the planning budget cuts of 11,000, those are budgets that are associated with a number of different administration functions, scanning of plans, undertaking all sorts of different functions, and basically we're reducing the money that's available to undertake that work. To be honest with you, a lot of those areas are changing because of the way planning applications are submitted. Planning applications are generally coming in now online, and therefore there is less need for scanning of plans. And so we don't need to replace, or we're not looking to replace certain items of equipment which are associated with that, which is where that budget cutting is coming from. What it obviously does do, if there is an uptake of people submitting planning applications in paper form, it does make our lives a little bit more difficult, but that is certainly a trend that's gone on now for some years. In respect of the tourism marketing, which I think is what Councillor Hooper was talking about, and the use of SPF, we have always had a tourism marketing reserve which we've used for publicising activities and tourism events in the Vale of Morgan. We have earmarked, and rightly so, Shared Prosperity Fund allowed us to earmark certain funding to support events in the towns across the Vale. Basically, we are not replacing funding. That shared prosperity funding is doing a different job and is certainly taking some of the strain. But it does mean what we have done is cut the publicity budget for tourism events across the Vale, which we as a council will fund. We are using shared prosperity to encourage others to hold events and to undertake different functions throughout the Vale. And as I say, those are slightly different roles. But we, as a council, will no longer have a budget of the size we used to have to publicise events in the Vale. And then finally, I think we were talking about the issues around Cosmoston. Cosmoston remains a very well-used facility, as does Porthcurry Country Park. One of the issues, obviously, is that this isn't necessarily a statutory function, and we have to find different ways of keeping the parks open. We recognise how important they are to residents and to the public at large in the whole of the Vale of the Morgan. Unfortunately, the medieval village as an attraction doesn't bring any income into the council, and indeed at the moment, as it currently stands, does cost the council money because we have some members of staff who are employed to provide information and to do some general maintenance tasks in that country park. We've reviewed that service and we will be looking at how we can do that going forward. But we don't really have the luxury of being able to have those staff, if you like, focus directly on the country park. So I think it will be something that we will be reviewing as we go forward into the new financial year. But going forward, the country park remain very attractive to visitors. We're not seeing drop-offs in numbers of visitors at all. And I think it's important that if we're going to keep those country parks open, we have to do so by looking at how we can make the funding available in other ways.
Thank you, Marcus. So just to try and summarise what I think has been a really good debate about the specific, excuse me, the specific proposals that are before us this evening. I think most of the discussion we've had is focused around concerns and questions around the potential impact of the proposed changes, whether that's increases to service charges or changes to the way that services are delivered. So I hope committee will agree with me that we'll pick that up through the forward work programme, and we will look forward as a committee to receiving reports that advise us about the progress with the proposals that are within the budget if they're finally agreed, and also the impact those have going forward, and if there is any negative impact, how that is being mitigated in year. The only specific feedback I think I've got for CPR committee, and forgive me, I'm conscious I'm croaking, I have a dry throat, so I hope you can bear with me. The only specific response I have before me, I think, going back to CPR, is that we are concerned about the proposed £5,000 savings that might be achieved through introducing charges to coastal toilets And we would like that to be reviewed and for an environmental impact assessment to be undertaken, particularly in terms of any potential impact on, particularly any impact on in relation to gender and people with a disability. I hope committee will agree that that's a reasonable summary of what I think, as I say, has been a lengthy and very helpful consideration of the issues before us. And other than that, I just move that we note the report. And if committee members are happy with that, can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And thank you, officers, for the detailed responses that you've given to those questions. And we move on now to agenda item 4. This is the second reference from Cabinet, and it's the draft capital programme proposals for 24-25 to 28-29. And Matt, I believe you're taking us through this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a number of slides to introduce this item as well, just 6 or 7, so not quite as lengthy an introduction as on the revenue budget, albeit the capital we do have a number of challenges as well. So just a bit of a headlines off the first slide here. The report in front of you sets out the draft capital proposals for 24-5, 28-9, so 5-year programme. We had the capital settlement at the same time as the revenue one from Welsh Government on the 19th of December. We were awarded just short of £7 million, so about £3.5 million grant and £3.5 million supported borrowing. A very small decrease on 23-4, albeit with the backdrop of rising prices. There is no forward settlement, and actually perhaps should have emphasised that on the revenue as well. Some of the forecasting we've been doing on revenue is on the basis of the financial analysis, not on announcements from government. So no further announcements on capital beyond 24-5, but we've assumed for planning purposes that we'll have a similar level of resources for the next couple of years. Obviously, we review whilst our capital programme's 5 years, we do review it on a rolling basis. The next slide is taken from the report, and it's just the spend side. So we are proposing a relatively ambitious programme again in 24-5 of investment in the Vale, across the Vale, £104 million. Some of the later years drop down a little bit. And I'm sure when we get close to those years, there will be schemes coming forward and funding and resources to support those. We've had quite a challenging budget setting round, a little bit in contrast against the revenue budget, where we're not so much looking for savings, but looking for bids for investment. And when those came forward from services, we requested those by the 20th of October. When they came forward, we had just short of £19 million of bids for 2024-5. A lot of commitments already exist against 24-5 and future years in the programme from work we've done in the past, prioritising resources and investment. And to that extent, there was only actually 339k of new resource to put those bids against. So we've had quite a difficult task across the autumn coming forward with the proposals that are in front of you today. There's been quite critical review of those, so they've been to the Insight Board on the next slide and senior leadership team. And I guess some of the debate and discussion we've had is as much about the risks associated with not progressing some of the high priority schemes and the opportunity costs associated with the level of funding identified. So it's identified that some of the risks associated with not identifying the funding could be more significant than some of the high cost schemes that were already in the programme that haven't been able to be progressed. So for that reason, we've actually had to go back and look at the existing commitments that were in the programme and take some of these schemes out, so that some of the more high-risk schemes coming forward in the new bids could actually be funded and brought into the programme. So this next slide sets those out, £12 million across the 5 years of the programme. This isn't to say none of these schemes will go forward, but they're not in the programme at the moment, and we'll have to review them in future years. And doubtless, for example, there will be bridge schemes coming forward in the future as well. But at the moment, these schemes are out. That's with the exception of the Clanmice flood alleviation scheme, which we intend bringing back in the final proposals to Cabinet at the end of the month. It's very likely that such a fund, and whilst it's not an approved scheme at the moment, it is a need that's recognised and needs to be in the programme. It would be very likely funded on an 85-15 basis. So there'd be a significant match and grant from Welsh Government, and certainly within our available resources at the moment, certainly something like capital receipts could make up the balance of that. So I guess the message from this, they're out at the moment, but the capital programme is fluid. It's reviewed on an annual basis, and we may see some of these schemes coming back in the future. I now want to move on to the next slide, and these are the new schemes pertinent to this committee that are being brought into the programme, and Miles or Emma will just briefly talk you through those and the impact that they're going to have.
I think that's working. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, as Matt has said, some of the previously agreed capital schemes have had to be moved around to enable us to have money for this year to deal with our immediate priorities. So they're not off the table, as Matt has said, but we're unlikely to spend on some of those schemes in 24-25, so they've been moved back. So in terms of the current list, 1.5 million for highway resurfacing and treatment. We're very grateful for that money, but a review we had in 2019 suggested we need around circa 3 million to stand still with our highways assets. So we're reviewing that position again, but I think we're in the same position here as many other councils in the UK. Many years of underinvestment has caused us a problem here. So we're grateful for this money, and you will see an improvement in our highway surfaces as a result of this 1.5 million, and a report will come with the 3-year capital programme where we tell you the streets we're doing and why, and it'll come to this committee. The one below is a top-up for the current scheme ongoing at Penarth Leisure Centre, a major capital scheme for replacing the high-level glazing, and that scheme is close to completion, and this is a top-up for that particular scheme. The one below that, Penarth Marina landslip. We own land at Penarth Marina, and unfortunately it's unstable, and it's falling onto the land which isn't owned by us. So we have to stabilise it. We have a legal duty to do so. So that work is considerable and over 2 years, and we've been through many legal processes with this, and there's really no way to avoid that expenditure. Unfortunately, we have a legal obligation to undertake that work. Some good news. I think lines in the programme. The next two, we are currently out to consultation on a tree strategy for the council. So in recognition of our Project Zero commitments, so this is additional planting of trees and additional maintenance of existing stock. So we've yet to decide where we're going to spend this money, but some of it may be used to purchase trees for members of the public to plant themselves in specific areas, because the strategy talks about increasing urban tree canopy to a percentage figure. So that doesn't really, it doesn't matter who plants those trees as long as they're in those areas. And if they are planted by the public and looked after them, then that's a cost for them and not to us. So we'll do a mixture of both. But those two lines we're really grateful for. It represents a move towards protecting our tree canopy and increasing it over time. The next figure for Windsor Road retaining wall, we've got a structural issue with the retaining wall on Windsor Road, and that is for design and next steps. And then the last figure, Landau improvements. Members will be aware of many concerns about the access roads to Landau. Some of the access road has been repaired by the landowner, and there'll be a report coming to Cabinet shortly that specifies or asks permission to use some of our funding to repair some of the access road, sort of in partnership with the landowner. So they do some, we do some. And the other issue with it is to extend the lease for a period. So we're still in the market for new land to build a new site, and that needs to be said. Up till now, we've been unable to find a suitable site. We've looked at many areas in and around Landau. There is a possibility of a new piece of land within the existing site, which officers are currently considering. But until then, we want to go for an increased lease period for the existing site to allow us the time to search for a longer period, but also to undertake some improvements to the access road and to the site itself. So lesser money than there was in the programme previously, which was to replace the site. That was insufficient to replace the site anyway. So this is useful because it'll allow this current site to be accessed better. So we'll start work within the next few months on that, subject to Cabinet agreeing how that money should be spent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're coming back to you, Matt.
So just the next steps, very similar to the revenue budget. So we're still in this period of consultation that finishes with the public on Friday and with scrutiny on Thursday. We'll then come back to Cabinet end of the month with the final capital programme and a refresh of the capital strategy as well. So at this stage, we've just looked at capital proposals, but the full report will come forward at the end of the month. That will then go on to Council the first week of March. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Miles. Committee members will be really pleased to see that there is funding proposed for the tree strategy. We had a very lengthy discussion about that last month, and we're delighted to see that really important investment going forward. And I think also committee members will very much, as Councillor Hooper referenced at the very beginning, I think at the committee meeting, will recognise the tremendous pressures that the council is facing. And so the approach, which is prioritising capital bids on the basis of health and safety and also those which align with the corporate priorities, certainly to me seems to make absolute sense. But are there any questions or comments from councillors in relation to the capital report? Councillor Penn, please.
Thanks, Chair. Miles just went over some of the numbers then. Two of the things are in my ward. The landslip stabilisation fund, Penarth Marina. There was another slip recently. Will that affect this figure? And the Windsor Road retaining wall, we were on a litter pick before the 22 local elections, and I pointed this out to Councillor Thomas with my builder's head on and said that doesn't look good, and the problem was discovered. My only worry is that the 200k, when I look at it again with my builder's head on, that's not going to be enough. Because I mean, both of them are big, but the Windsor Road retaining wall, is that going to be enough? Simple this time. Thank you.
Miles, are you able to respond to those? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Penn. Yeah, the Windsor Road. The answer, I guess, is we don't yet know whether that be sufficient funds. So we're designing and we're looking at the cost of that. So that 200k is the start of the process. So we won't know until we finish the design whether that will cover the full cost. So it's a point well made, and construction costs are high at the moment. So I don't know is the answer. We will know when we finish the design. In terms of the other one, the one at Penarth Marina, it often slips and slides. We monitor it regularly. The scheme is for essentially caging the whole bank. So I don't think that a minimal slide between now and when we do the work will change much of the pricing, because we'll need to bore into the cliff face itself to attach the cage to it. So unless there's something major that happens between now and when we start the work, then I think we'll just monitor it as we have been. But there's always variances with these things. But as far as I'm aware, in terms of the odd slide which we're monitoring, that shouldn't have any effect on the overall price.
Thank you, Miles. And clearly one of the reasons why we need a prudent approach to reserves in case of any unforeseen circumstances going forward. Councillor Penn, did you want to come back in on that, or is that sufficient for your questions? Yeah. Thank you. I can see that you're nodding. Councillor Driscoll, please. Councillor Driscoll, I think you've got your camera on. I'm not sure that you've got your mic on. Yeah, so we can see you, but you're muted. And you're still muted. So, Councillor Driscoll, if you push the very large speaker button on your laptop, that should bring you in, and make sure your mic is unmuted and your camera is switched on. And we can see you, so you've got your camera switched on, but you're still muted. Can I ask you, Councillor Driscoll, did you put your headphones on after you joined the committee meeting? Because if you did, that is probably the reason why we can't hear you. So if you go out and come back in again, we should be able to hear you as well as see you. And meanwhile, I'll bring in Councillor Hooper, because I believe you were next, and then we'll come back to you, Councillor Driscoll. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillor Hooper, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. The first one related to potholes, and didn't we last year talk about a extra special bit of kit that would do potholes quicker than ever before? I just welcome an update on the pothole magic machine that we had last time. Miles, you made a point there. You said, and I quote you, many, many years of underinvestment. I think this talks to the point that we're in. We're reducing the public realm as we underinvest for the future. And we're just going to be the points that when we talk about the revenue impacts, these are often down to getting the capital wrong in the first place. So this is just a cautionary note that we're just following the same old problems, and they'll come and bite us later. And I just want the last point, and this is probably a point for Matt more than anyone else, but it does relate to this committee. We've seen the city deal figures start to come in. And this is an area where there's, I think, less focus, and it's something that we really need this committee to make sure that it understands where city deal funds are being utilised. So it's just a point of pleading with the committee that we find out more about it. And if that means we bring city deal officials to this scrutiny committee meeting in the future, I, for one, would welcome that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So before I bring Miles back in, just to remind you, Councillor Hooper, and also committee members, that City Deal does form part of the Forward Work Programme, and we are anticipating a report in coming months. So there will be an opportunity, I'm sure, to address the issue that you've raised tonight and in other meetings, and we can consider next steps following that. Miles, are you able to address the other concerns? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Yeah, I've been in this council 40 years. I've seen many magic pothole machines over the years. I've seen very few that will do the whole range of work that we actually are responsible for. So we'll try anything at least once, but essentially filling the holes in with tarmac and using manual labour is the most flexible arrangement we've got. Often these machines require huge investment up front. We've had a few of them over the years. We'll try anything, but I'm not aware of anything that would reduce our costs that we could even use as a cost to save. Because if there was something out there that we could invest in that would make us more efficient, then we would have done that. And lastly, just to be clear, my many years of underinvestment was the national picture. Members will understand that the UK government and the issue with HS2 and that link not being completed and where that money has been channeled in England. The councils like us and like councils in the UK, we need significant funding from our national governments. This is money that no council can be expected to find. This is huge amounts of money on what is essentially a strategic network for the UK. So this is a bigger issue than just available Morgan. We need money in Wales, and we need money in our road networks. We're not building roads anymore, which is absolutely fine by me. Let's just look after the ones we've got.
Thank you, Miles. Yes, 2.1% settlement from national government to Welsh government. There was some headway. I think one of the report's highlights, I think it was the previous revenue report, the government did have some headway, but chose to put that 2% into reduction in national insurance rather than coming to local authorities. So these are the decisions that get made, and hence the pressure that we and other local authorities find ourselves facing. Councillor Driscoll, let's see if we can bring you in at this point. No, we can see you, Councillor Driscoll, but we cannot hear you. So I can only assume that you're still on mute.
Can you ask him to go out to the meeting and rejoin?
Have you left the meeting and rejoined, Councillor Driscoll? If you leave the meeting completely and come back in without your headphones on, we think that will help to resolve the issue. Thank you. And I will bring you back in, Councillor Driscoll, at that point. Councillor Prothero, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Miles. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if I may, on the Landau Recycling Centre. It has been for me in the ward that I work in about the most important question that I'm asked all the time. And you probably will remember the day after the election. I think it was something I spoke to you about because it's been, I suppose, an issue for, well, decades, because I would say the road especially has been a terrible issue. So my question really is to do with the improvements to the existing site that you're proposing. I trust and I hope that road will be improved in the next couple of months, as you said, and that's wonderful. But what are the other improvements to the site that you're proposing? Thank you.
Miles, thank you.
I think, yeah. Cheers. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Prothero. Yeah, I agree with you. You did raise it with me very early on, and I think it's been an issue Landau for many years. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the landowner will not repair the full access route. I suppose we could hold out for them to do that, but we risk then issues with access to our own site. So the report will look at the benefits of our residents, and in the report is the numbers of users for the site, of us working in partnership so that the landowner does some and we do the rest. It really depends on what's left from that work, because the main priority for us, and I'm sure for yourself, is getting vehicles into the site safely. Whatever's left then, we'll look at accessibility to the skips primarily, because there's a setup in Llandau, if you're not familiar with it, where you have to go up a series of steps to get to the skips themselves. So we'll look at improving that initially with whatever money's left. If you have ability issues, the staff will assist already, but it's not as easy to access the skips as it is in Barry. So we can't do a great deal on that site because it's limited by the nature of how it's designed and the size of it. But our primary function, if we can have any money left over from resurfacing, is to improve accessibility to the skips themselves. But I can't commit. I need to know how much the work to the road's going to cost first to see what's left of that 100,000.
Yeah, thank you, Miles. Councillor Prothero, did you want to come back in on that, or is that sufficient?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Miles. And again, I want to thank you and the officers for your attempts to find new sites. Been engaged for the last 18 months on this issue with you, and I know how tirelessly you've searched and tried. So, you know, accept the situation. If we make this accessible, I'm sure that my residents will be very, very grateful for that. And also, as you've said, if we can do something about the steps, but good to know that in all situations, the attendance there will help people who can't make the steps. So that's great. And thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Driscoll, I know your hand isn't up, but I understand you've rejoined us, and I want to see if you're able to be heard. No, Councillor Driscoll, I'm afraid we still can't hear you. I'm not sure there's much else that we can do at this stage to assist you. If you can just have one more go at looking to see if your microphone is switched on. If you've muted it, that will be the reason why we can't hear you. And I think we've lost you completely at this point, Councillor Driscoll. So it doesn't seem to me that we're going to be able to overcome that difficulty. So can I just suggest that whatever question or comment you wanted to raise tonight, please do feel free to forward that to officers, and I know they'll be very happy to take any questions or comments or issues that you wanted to raise and get back to you. Because I'm afraid we cannot hear you, Councillor Driscoll. I don't see any other hands from anyone else, so I will assume that there are no further questions or comments in relation to this agenda item. So again, just to thank officers for presenting that information to us so clearly and helpfully, and for all the work that's been done in relation to that. And I move that we note the report. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. So that concludes our business for this evening. All I'm left to do is remind everyone that our next meeting is next week at Tuesday, the 20th of February, and we're back to the normal meeting time of 6 o'clock. So thank you for your attendance this afternoon, and good night.